let's talk about TikTok.
Let's talk about TikTok. So we have a video here of Steve Mnuchin. Steve Mnuchin is involved right now in putting together some investors who would buy TikTok in the case that the bill that passed through the House and is now in the hands of the Senate is passed, signed by President Biden, and TikTok ByteDance is forced to divest TikTok, its U.S. portfolio, essentially. There are different ways that they could go about divesting that operation, maybe just split off the entire U.S. But the forced divestment, say it happens, Steve Mnuchin, he's going to be there, arms open wide, ready with investors to buy TikTok. And there's some interesting questions about where Steve Mnuchin may get that money. Let's start by rolling this clip of Steve Mnuchin talking about the potential deal.
I think the legislation should pass. And I think it should be sold. I understand the technology. It's a great business, and I'm going to put together a group to buy TikTok.
You're trying to buy TikTok?
I am, because this should be owned by U.S. businesses. There's no way that the Chinese would ever let a U.S. company own something like this in China.
You said, have you already put a group together?
Yeah, well, I'm working on it.
You're exploring a group.
I've spoken to a bunch of people, but
who would be part of your group?
I can't tell that to you now, but
it
would be a combination of investors, so there would be no one investor that controlled this. And the issue is all about the technology. This needs to be controlled by U.S.
Let me ask you a very practical question.
So that was Becky Quick and Andrew Ross Sorkin talking to Steve Mnuchin on CNBC. He said he would not get into who's involved, but it would not be any one investor. Let's put this next tear sheet B2 up on the screen. Semaphore had a good piece on Ron Wyden, kind of blowing the whistle here on who Steve Mnuchin may be getting his funding from. Reading from the article, they say Senator Ron Wyden, the chair of the powerful Senate Finance Committee, sharply criticized former Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin and his ties to money from the Middle East in his effort to buy TikTok from its Chinese owner. Mnuchin told CNBC last week that he's assembling a group of investors to buy the platform after the House overwhelmingly passed a bill forcing it to either be sold within 6 months or banned from app stores. The White House has urged the Senate, where the bill has powerful backers and opponents in both parties, to move quickly. Mnuchin gave few details on who might be part of his bidding group, except to say that he was working a combination of investors. But much of the $2.5 billion investment funds he raised after leaving office came from governments in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, where Mnuchin was a frequent visitor during his time in government. Saudi investments, not unfamiliar to former members of the Trump administration whatsoever. So actually this point that Ron Wyden is making and Semaphore is making is a really important one because it seems almost impossible that all of that money would be coming entirely from domestic sources, given the Steve Mnuchin and honestly just the way finance works in this country right now. One point I did want to make, we can put B3 up on the screen just really quickly. There's a very important argument about how this bill is crony capitalism and that you have a Steve Mnuchin sweeping in, going to make billions off the deal with his investors. They'll all be sitting back and laughing, and it's because they lobbied Congress for this bill to pass. And in the meantime, it gives the deep state access to TikTok. So I agree that it's crony capitalism. I do just want to point out, though, this is up on the screen, quoting from a Wall Street Journal article, actually quoting from a TikTok spokesperson in a Wall Street Journal article. Over the past year, they say, we took the unprecedented step of granting Oracle full access to our source code and our algorithm. That's not news. It's been known that this $1.5 billion Project Texas initiative TikTok embarked upon after being pushed by the Trump administration, actually at the time. This was basically a big PR push that ultimately went beyond PR and actually, as they got more and more pressure, ended up with them giving Oracle cloud access, storing their U.S. data in the Oracle cloud. Oracle is a defense contractor. So one point just in this big conversation about how the U.S. deep state's going to get access to TikTok data, they want it. That's why suddenly they're sweeping through this bill. Well, I mean, they're sweeping through this bill because they do want it, but they do likely already have access via Oracle to data that they want.
Right. It's not just the data they want the control at the root. And so you talked about the Gulf states that have contributed to Mnuchin's fund. There's a Gulf adjacent state that has been in talks with Mnuchin's fund at minimum. That's also relevant here, and that's literally Israel. So we talked earlier about some good reporting that Barack Revita did. He and Jonathan Swan in 2021 had a scoop for Axios. the headline, Israeli spy chief in talks to join Mnuchin's investment fund. So the head of Mossad, before he retired from his Mossad position, was in talks with Mnuchin to become an investor in Mnuchin's fund. We don't, where was that money coming from? Did that money enter into Mnuchin's fund? So the idea that for national security reasons, we're going to seize TikTok and hand it over to a fund that has Qatar, Saudi, and Emirati money, and maybe Israeli money, but Israeli government money, does not make a whole lot of sense just on its own terms from a national security perspective, despite Mnuchin's claims that, well, no single investor is going to have control here. If Saudi Arabia has given him $1 billion and is the biggest leveraged and is the biggest fund in Mnuchin's fund, they have a lot of power there, regardless of what kind of contract you write up about who has what say when it comes to TikTok.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And in general, my takeaway on this is we are such an oligarchy because it gets back to the binary choice of Trump versus Biden. There's really no good choice in this situation. I mean, I actually think the situation with Chinese control over TikTok has been concerning for a really long time. I think TikTok absolutely should be banned. I think, though, the bill that passed the House of Representatives was that Section B in the bill that doesn't just narrow this to TikTok is genuinely very problematic. There's a way to do this bill that literally writes out this just applies to TikTok and ByteDance. The decision to broaden it beyond just TikTok and ByteDance obviously stems from ulterior motives that don't. I mean, it's in the text. That is as blatantly of an ulterior motive as you could possibly put into the bill, is by saying, well, maybe this will apply in different cases as well. And instead of just actually doing this as the problem crops up, we can put this next step.
Although, just one point on that, this is where the Supreme Court's bizarre libertarian interpretation of corporation as people comes into play. Because if corporations are people, then a bill that targets an individual corporation is a bill of attainder, which is, you can Control F the Constitution for that one, banned in the Constitution. You can't, basically what England used to do, which we fought against, was they'd try somebody for treason and the jury would be like, we don't think you made your case here. And then Parliament would be like, this person must be executed. And they'd chop his head off. And so that was a bill of attainder, which is like going after an individual. And so right there in the Constitution, it says Congress can't do that to individuals. Congress never meant that a company was an individual. But the Supreme Court has, rethought, humanity to include corporations in its definition of people. Which would then require them to say you can't do this. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe. And so if we put the next element up on the screen here, you can see. So that section that we were just talking about, where it involves companies that have at least 20%. A hostile foreign country has at least 20%. Enemy country has at least 20% stake in an app. Actually, a lot of apps have international headquarters, as Axios points out here. These numbers actually really surprised me, Ryan. So this is from Axios. In 2024, not only are a greater number of apps from China and Hong Kong, but more apps from that region have made it to the top 10 most downloaded apps in the U.S. so far this year, compared to just one in 2021. So Temu, really popular, starting to get really popular. CapCut, that's another app by ByteDance. Shein, obviously, they're an e-commerce app. A lot of people think of them as a website, but Temu and Shein have apps. And so we're increasingly getting into a situation where, this is a real problem. Josh Hawley has been making a really good point about how, American creators, American consumers shouldn't have to be responsive to China at this point, that TikTok is an American industry. If as ByteDance insists, TikTok is truly just an American company. It's based in America. It's for Americans. Ultimately, though, what we know from great reporting in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and other places is that even with Project Texas, the people who are involved in Project Texas, this big effort to make TikTok more domestic here in the States, they're still getting plenty of requests for the data from Beijing. So I think there's a real point to be made. I think also the latent threat of TikTok, because we are aware that the Hawks are beating the war drums with China. So whether or not you agree with them, the threat of a hot war, a hot conflict over Taiwan is real. Whether or not we like that, that is real. And so the latent threat of a potential hostile enemy in a hot war controlling a huge source of news, the primary source of news, in fact, for young people in this country, that actually can put the lives of American men and women on the line. I think the latent threat of TikTok, if a hot war erupts, is worse than, in this case, Meta, Instagram. And I think those threats of censorship and propaganda are huge with those other giants. But the hot war question is a really, really big one. But that just brings us back to this oligarchy. Like, your options suck either way. It's cronyism if TikTok wins. It's cronyism if TikTok loses.
And my solution to the hot war question would be: all right, Oracle already controls their data and their kind of algorithm, or has like direct access to it, and therefore, like, if there is a national security crisis or some kind of war, then your defense contractor already has it. So you don't need to turn it over to Steve Mnuchin, Mohammed bin Salman, and Mossad in the meantime.
It's such a perfect, if there are Saudi investors ultimately involved, even indirectly in the Mnuchin deal.
Of course they have to be.
It's hard to believe.
They have a big piece of Twitter. Like, they love all this stuff.
Your reporting on Twitter and Saudis has been also wildly undercovered by the rest of the media.
Right, where they bribed engineers to get them to out the names of dissidents who they then killed. And Ron Wyden mentions in this report, he's like, maybe a country that put spyware on the wife of a Washington Post journalist's phone, then lured him into a consulate and chopped him into pieces, is not the company that we want to force a sale of a social media app to.
Sagar's friend Hassan Minhaj was censored on Netflix in Saudi Arabia for like if we're going to be
censorship, good Lord,
freaked out. It's the same thing with the neoconservative position on Saudi Arabia has put them in so many binds over the years that they just laugh and smile their way through on CNBC hits. And here we are. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.